the season. Before we get to the questions, I do want to quickly hit on and want to get David's thoughts on the story I broke on Monday, which is it's not like a huge story, but again, we're in the middle of the offseason. So we'll take anything at this point. So in short, I reported that the WAC, the Western Athletic Conference, this upcoming season is going to change the way that it seeds its conference tournament. It's going to do something that's never been done before. And what's going to happen is the WAC is going to take its league tournament and seed its teams 1 to 12 based upon how good they were for the entirety of the regular season. There will be a link to this story in this podcast description if you have not yet seen it. But in essence, what's happening here is WAC Commissioner Brian Thornton and his Associate Commissioner Drew Spiraw, who's the son of a former longtime Iowa assistant coach, Kirk, who just retired. They are former basketball coaches, and they wanted to figure out a way to better position the WAC to get into the NCAA tournament with an auto qualifier and then have that team be seated in the best line possible. New Mexico State's coming off of an upset win over fifth-seeded UConn. So what's going to happen is that with the aid of Ken Pomeroy, who created this algorithm, which is not that complex. I know when people hear algorithm and advanced analytics, they have a tendency to want to immediately check out. I get all that. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see Nada has brought up the story there. But what Pomeroy is doing is he is basically set up for the WAC a system that will evaluate and reward or penalize teams based upon how they perform every single game of the season. One misnomer, this story got a lot more traction and response than I anticipated. I knew it would make a little bit of noise, but I was surprised at actually how much we got back on this. And Cobb, I'll tee you up in just a second here. But in essence, every single win is a positive and every single loss is a negative. It doesn't matter if you play the number one team and you lose, you still will get docked. If you play the worst team in the sport and you win, you will still get an incremental increase. But the reality is, as coaches and players will tell you, wins are not created equally and neither are losses. It is harder to beat some teams than it is to beat others. Where you play that game, home, road, neutral, all these are actual real world factors. And so what this is going to do is it's going to reflect that reality. And so what you will see on the WAC's official conference page and standings for men's and women's basketball next season is you will see wins and losses. Those still do matter, but you will also see what they've shown me is they've titled it bonus. I don't know what they're going to title this other column, but it is going to be a tally, a season-long tally that reflects how well you've done for the entire season. And the point that the reason why they're doing this is to, again, give the WAC representative in the NCAA tournament the best chance at having the best seed. And what happens then? You have a better chance of winning a game. If you win a game, you get money for your conference, etc., so on and so on. Cobb, I hope you read this story, but your thoughts on what the WAC is doing here? Because I would say the response to this has been 75-25, either negative or not so sure about this, but there has been some enthusiastic approval as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, first thought was get off my lawn. This is ridiculous. This is the Gonzagaification, the Ken Palmification of sports, didn't like it. But like with many things, the initial reaction, once it subsides and you look into it and you realize how well thought out some things are, it does make some sense. And I want to commend you for breaking the story, one. And then two, as you're saying, the attention is getting, you got over 500 retweets on a WAC story in July. Come on, you struck a chord somewhere. So great job on that. But I like it from the standpoint of, I saw a Ken Palm tweet this morning that margin isn't necessarily going to be a huge part of this. It's just going to reward you more for good wins and reward you less for bad wins and ding you less for good losses and ding you more for bad losses. So I think there's a misconception that what we're going to see is a bunch of teams trying to run up the score on each other in WAC conference play for the purpose of making their metrics look good so they can get a better standing in the league standings. But I don't think that's a part of it. And so I think almost every rebuttal that people have, there is an explanation for, which I was pleasantly surprised by.
Yeah, margin of victory is not a factor whatsoever in this. So the idea that you would run up the score and somehow damage yourself by doing it is not the case. In fact, and this is pointed out by Bart Torvik, our friend on Twitter as well, in a system like this, you actually want to beat your opponent by 1 point. You want to strengthen the quality of your opponent by as much as possible. It doesn't incentivize you to run up the score if the formula was tweaked to have margin of victory, which it doesn't here. I like the fact that we have a conference that's trying something different. I like the fact that we can have some diversity of thought in college sports. This is not necessary and will never happen in a power conference level. I was surprised at the response to it because it is the WAC. I think the majority of people that respond to this are not WAC fans. They didn't attend WAC institutions. I'm sure
the
some
WAC
of them
is WAC. The WAC is WAC and has always been WAC. And if you go and look at the history of that league, I mean, it's a revolving door of teams. It's just crazy. It's a crazy league. So I love that I love that they're the ones who are trying this. And I think the important thing to note as well, I think for fans of some conferences, the Big 12, for instance, there's 10 teams in that league. They play an 18-game conference schedule. Every team, Kansas plays everybody in that league twice during the regular season. It's very neat. It's very symmetrical. Everybody plays the other teams the same number of times. Well, in a lot of other leagues, the WAC included, that's not the case because of the number of teams that are in it, the number of games that they play. Some teams end up playing a much more difficult schedule in the league than others. And that's the key part of this is actually, I guess if you want to look at it in a certain way, makes things more fair because it balances out those uneven rungs in the way that the conference schedules play out on a year-to-year basis.
Yeah, and some people have an issue with the fact that this is non-conference that's included. To me, that makes it more fair. You're actually fairly evaluating a team for season-long performance, and it's just good business practice. And this is more than an experiment. Thornton told me this is the expectation is this is going to be a permanent thing that will be open to some tweaks if need be. As we record this podcast, the WAC has actually not officially announced this, but I think that will happen on Tuesday. And if not Tuesday, it'll happen on Wednesday. And if you want all the details, again, go read the story. But I think it is important to note that this is just one league. It wouldn't surprise me if we saw a couple other leagues do it, but it's just their way. Leagues have the power to determine however they want to seed their postseason bracket, to determine their automatic qualifier. This also threads the needle between setting up your teams in an ideal spot, strongest to weakest in your bracket, but still remaining beholden to a conference tournament, putting yourself on television, giving the team that's seeded 5th, 6th, 9th, like the hope you're in the bracket. If you win it, you're going to the tournament. If you win it, you got to win it. But this just sets it up to be the most fair overall. I do like it. I think it actually is a practical approach, even though there are people that reflexively think this is advanced analytics run amok. It really isn't. And the process at play here is actually not that complicated. I don't want to burrow too deep into how this is actually going to work, but I'll do a quick explainer, and then we can move on to mailbag questions. Essentially, what Pomeroy did was he looked at the 150th team overall in the sport. That's a little bit above average. And I'm not going to get into all the nuance on this, but basically that line right about there is the sweet spot for where WAC teams should try and pit themselves from a percentage standpoint about how they would play against different teams overall. I'll read you a few different, this is actually from the WAC. I'll read you how this actually works. So every game has a 1.0 overall value to it, or 100%, right? So the 150th team, last year, San Diego State was 25th overall, okay? The 150th team in the country, if it played San Diego State at home, it would have had a 74.9% chance of losing that game. So if you beat San Diego State or the 25th team, you would get plus 0.749. How do you make up for the rest of that? It's 0.251. Your penalty would be minus 0.251. I get it. Some people are listening to this and they're probably like, oh no, they're going to add up all these things. This is what we have to pay attention to. I promise it's not that complicated, but the better the team, the higher the reward. The worse the team, the more harsh the penalty. And yes, whether you play it at home, on the road, or on a neutral floor will dictate how high or low those rewards are. And it is a season-long updated daily tally that the WAC will have. And then at the end of the regular season, once the WAC finishes its regular season play, a day or two after that, the standings will lock, they will seed, and they will go play their conference tournament. I'm certainly intrigued by it. One other thing from this that I don't know how they're going to resolve is, David, the NCAA doesn't release the net rankings until like the first week of December. And the reason they don't do that is because if we saw the net rankings on November 19th, you would have like a Colgate situation all over again, right? A team would be ranked 17th that by the end of the season is going to look 117th, but it would look wacky. And then the NCAA is opening itself up to just, predictable and obvious and rote criticisms there. So is the WAC going to be able to publicly disclose these standings before the net is made available for public consumption on a daily basis in early December, or will we not get that until early December? That I don't have an answer to yet. They're still trying to figure that out, but it certainly will be intriguing. It's a nice little wrinkle for the WAC, and we'll see how it shakes out this upcoming season.
Yeah, I'm glad the WAC is the one doing it, right? It's the WAC. Who cares? I mean, it's probably a one-bid league, so it's the perfect league to guinea pig this on, and yeah, if the SEC came out with this, it'd be like, okay, what are we doing? What's going on here? It's the WAC. So how often, do our listeners pull up the WAC standings on a weekly basis, right? Like
exactly,
that's where I fall on this eventually, is that, okay, at first it's a little weird. Okay. They did a good job of answering most of my questions. And at the end of the day, we're talking about a likely one-bid league here.
Likely one-bid league, and we'll see how it all shakes out. I'm certainly intrigued by it, and I like the fact they're doing it. By the way, the WAC and its commissioner Brian Thornton was also one of the driving forces behind a story we talked about 2 months ago, where they're trying to get a non-conference 2 games for all the teams that aren't in power conferences to play in February, a non-conference scheduling alliance where you wouldn't find out the games until January, and you would be paired against similar teams. Thornton did talk to me about that. There's an update in the story, but basically there's another meeting, I think later this month. They have to decide by September if they're going to do this. There are indications that many leagues want to do this, but they need the A10, the Mountain West, the West Coast Conference, and the American to really go in on this to give it viability and kind of a national reach. So there is optimism, but they are not quite there yet.